My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 57 years old. I make tea every morning at 6. I water the small rose bushes in front of my house. I sew buttons on shirts that come back missing one by one from the laundromat. I am quiet most days. People say I am kind. I try to be. Tonight the house was loud. The table was full. My son Daniel had friends from work. His wife Sophie had chosen a bright red dress that made her look like she was always ready for a camera. There was laughter and clinking of glasses. There were stories that made Daniel grin the way he did when he was a little boy and had eaten too much cake. I should have been happy. I had cooked the meal. I had set the table with my best plates. I had even bought a tiny vase and put a single white rose in it because Daniel liked white roses and he had told me once that small things mattered. But small things do not always protect you. Sophie laughed too loud at a joke and then looked at me like I had just spilled something on her new shoes. She leaned back and said, for the whole table to hear, "You know, Daniel, your mother is sweet, but she is stuck in the past. She clings to things that do not help. She clings to pity and sorrow. She never moved on." A hush fell for a moment. I felt the heat rise in my face. My hands tightened on the teacup. My throat felt like it had a stone in it. Daniel smiled a little, like someone who was trying to be calm. He raised his glass. He said, with a voice so soft it stung, "She's right, Mom." I wondered if I had heard him wrong. The words hit me like a cold wind. My son, my little boy who used to hide in my coat when thunder came, had sided with a stranger's words against me. I swallowed hard. I could not speak. My tea trembled in my hand. Tears came before I could stop them. I rose slowly from my chair. Everyone looked. Sophie's smile tightened. Some of the guests shifted, uncomfortable and unsure where to look. Daniel did not reach for my hand. He did not call me back. He watched me instead like he watched a bird that had flown into a window. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. I did not say anything. I quietly excused myself. The hallway was dim. The roses outside the window looked like pale ghosts under the porch light. I sat on the little bench by the door and let the quiet hold me. My chest hurt in a way that sleep could not fix. I pressed my forehead to my palm and tried to breathe. That night, after I had washed the dishes and listened to the muffled voices from the living room, I did something I had avoided for 20 years. I took the old phone from my drawer. It was a phone with numbers worn down by touch. I had 3 numbers in the memory that were harsh to look at. The number for the doctor who had told me that some doors could never open. The number for the social worker who had taken things without asking. And one number that I had not dialed since the year my son was 16. I dialed it. My fingers shook. The number buzzed through my bones. I heard the ring on the other end, a clean, tired sound. I listened to that ring like a prayer. Each tone sounded like an old song. On the 4th ring a voice answered. "Hello." The voice on the line was low, older than me, but steady. I had not heard that voice in 2 decades. For a moment the room spun. I could smell the kitchen again, baking bread, coffee. I could see the small blue dress Daniel had worn on his first day of school. I swallowed and my eyes stung again. "Hi," I said. My voice was small. There was a pause. Then the voice said my name, like it was a thing folded and kept in a pocket and suddenly taken out, "Margaret." I closed my eyes. My palms felt damp. I felt something loosen in my chest and fall, but I did not know if it would land on hope or ruin. "Yes," I said. The voice on the other end had always known how to say my name with understanding. She had known when I lied and when I told the truth. She had once done something for me that I had never fully forgiven and had never forgotten. I had avoided this call for 20 years because it hurt and because it promised change and because change was something I feared. I had been small and scared then. I had been ashamed and lonely. I had wrapped myself in the safety of staying put. That safety had become my life. I had told myself that truth could only break things, so I had kept it wrapped up like a fragile glass. But tonight Sophie's words had been like a tiny hand picking at the tape. They had slowly pulled and pulled until the tape came away and something fragile fell out. I had felt my son's laughter like a new kind of bruise. I had felt invisible. I had felt ashamed of the way I waited for small kindnesses and for the past to make sense. So I called. The voice on the line had not changed much. It was softer, maybe kinder. Or perhaps I had just learned to notice kindness where I had once missed it. "How are you?" she asked. I thought I would say fine. But the truth was heavy. "I'm not fine," I said. She listened like she used to listen. She did not rush to fix. She let me speak. I told her about the dinner. I told her because I could not hold that small cutting in my chest any longer. I told her because I wanted to feel like my words returned to someone who had lived through storms with me. I told her because the telephone line made long spaces feel safe, and because the past was nearer on the other end of the wire. When I finished, the voice was quiet. "I know," she said finally. Her name was Ruth. She had been a friend, then something else, then a stranger who took a different road. People had judged us for the choices we made when life got too hungry for us. People had called us selfish or foolish. We had both been young and poor and proud once, and we had both paid for it in different ways. Ruth said, "There are things I can do." She did not say what. Her words were a key without a lock. She said, "If you want help, I can look into it." I asked what she meant. She did not answer right away, but said, "Tomorrow. I will go tomorrow and try." "But Margaret, are you sure? Once you begin, you cannot go back." I felt the old fear. I felt the memory of a door shutting and a face I could not find again. My life had been a small place with soft edges. To open a door now meant pushing through jagged things. It meant change. But Sophie's words that night had been sharper than any fear. They had been a blade that cut away the habit of hiding. I remembered Daniel as a child, how he used to press his face into my sleeve and say, "Mom, it's okay." I remembered the small lullabies I had sung when the world had been loud. I remembered being brave when the room smelled of hospital lights and cold floors. I remembered that I had been brave before and that maybe some braveness lived in me still. "Do it," I said into the phone. "Please. Find out. And tell me what you learn." Ruth said, "I will. But be careful. Some doors you open do not close easily." I hung up after that. The house was very still. I stood and walked to the kitchen. The kettle was empty and the rose petals outside the window looked gray and heavy in the night. I rinsed the cup I had used and placed it in the rack. My hands were steady now. My heart was a drum I could hear. I went to bed that night and did not sleep much. I thought about all the times I had stood on the edge and not stepped forward. I thought about the life that had stuck to me like old jam on a plate. I thought about the small ways people can be cruel when they wear new clothes and have brighter smiles. I tried to tell myself that what I had done was small. I had only made a call. I had only asked a friend to look. I had only taken back a voice that had been quiet for 20 years. But the truth was, I knew that once Ruth began, the world would tilt. Secrets that sleep for years often wake with a hunger. They come out sharp and demanding. They do not always bring peace. The next day came with sun. I cleared the leftover plates from the table and put fresh water in the roses. I made Daniel a sandwich and put it in a small paper bag with a note that said, "Call me after work." I did not tell him why. The morning felt like a small kindness. I tried to keep to the ordinary. I watered the plants and dusted the photos on the mantel. The picture of Daniel as a toddler with crooked teeth smiled from its frame. I felt a mixture of love and sorrow because children grow and sometimes keep a piece of the child inside them that they forget to show. At 11 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Ruth. She said, "I found something." My mouth went dry. This was the part one had feared and wanted. I remembered how I had learned that some truths were like wild horses. Once freed, they run fast and cannot be controlled. "Can you come now?" I asked, though I did not know if I wanted to hear more. "I can," she said. "I'll be there in an hour." She arrived with a small bag and a face that had not forgiven the world for a lot of things. She sat at my kitchen table like she had always known where the coasters were. She had a calm voice, but there was steel in it now. She opened her bag. She took out papers, a folded envelope, and a small photograph that trembled between her fingers. "Do you remember this?" she asked. I looked at the picture. It was old, creased, and barely legible. There was a young woman in the image with hair like mine had been, shorter than, and a boy no older than 3. The boy's head was turned to the side. I could not see his face clearly, but something in the slope of the shoulders and the small, Bent ear made my throat ache. Yes, I said. My hand reached without thinking and touched the photograph. Ruth said, Margaret, there are records. People's names were switched. Paperwork was lost or hidden. I looked. I found a name that should have belonged to someone else. There are notes from the agency. There are signatures that don't match. It's messy, legal, and ugly, but it's there. My mind swam. I remembered nights pacing the house, the smell of baby powder, and the stern voice of a woman who said I could not keep him. I remembered the slam of the officer's shoes on the stairs as they went away with a small bundle. I had thought the law had chosen that path and closed the door. I had not known that doors sometimes close for reasons that are not true. Ruth said, I think someone made a choice for you. And Daniel might not be who you were told he was. My breath came out in a small sound. I felt like someone had taken my study floorboards and tipped them. The old world was moving. Can you prove it? I whispered. Ruth shook her head slowly. Not yet. But I can ask. I can write. I can try to pull records. And there is someone, she hesitated. Someone who remembers. But Margaret, this is not clean. If this comes out, people will be hurt. People will feel betrayed. I don't know how Daniel will react. I thought about that. I thought about Sophie's face last night, the way she had savored the sting of her own words. I thought about Daniel laughing like it was easier to laugh than stand with me. I thought about a life built on small betrayals, quiet ones that pile up like leaves until they smother the roots. Ruth slid the photograph back into the envelope. Her fingers brushed mine, and for a moment I felt less alone. Do it, I said. Please. Try. She nodded. I will. But Margaret, promise me something. Promise me you will be ready for whatever comes. This may change everything. I wanted to promise. I wanted to say, I am ready. But I felt my courage was still half-made. I felt like a child stepping into a playground for the first time. I did the only thing I could, I nodded. Ruth left with the papers and the photograph. She said she would call when she knew more. I watched her go down my path, the sun making a little gold halo over her head. The mail truck rattled by. A neighbor waved. The day went on like it always did. In the afternoon, Daniel called. He sounded casual. He asked about dinner. I told him I had cleaned up and that I would be home. He did not ask why I had left the party early. He did not ask if I was okay. He said he would stop by for his sandwich later. At 5:30, the doorbell rang. My heart did something odd and sudden. I opened the door to see Daniel standing there. He looked tired. He smelled of work and cologne. He smiled the same small smile he used when someone asked for money, and he did not want to refuse. Hi, Mom, he said. Hi, Danny, I said. I called him Danny always when I wanted to soften a moment. He took the sandwich I had made and sat at my kitchen table. His fingers tapped the wood a nervous little rhythm. He asked me about small things. Did the roses need water? Had I seen a new bakery near his office? His voice was smooth and careful. I watched him watch me. There was a shadow in his eyes that I did not understand. Before he left, he took my hand. He looked at my face like he wanted to say something and did not. Are you okay? He asked. I thought about telling him everything. I thought about telling him that I had called Ruth, that secrets from 2 decades back had been set loose, that a line of paper could change what we were. I thought about telling him how his laugh had felt like a knife. I thought about telling him that I loved him more than my own life, and that I had always chosen him even when people told me not to. But I did not say those things. I only smiled and told him to drive carefully. He left, and I watched him go down the path. The light fell over the street like a warm blanket. I stood in my doorway and felt small and very brave at the same time. Around 8 that night, my phone buzzed again. It was Ruth. She said, I have something. I found someone who remembers. Margaret, you need to sit down. My legs felt hollow. I sat on the bench by the door. Ruth's voice told me pieces, careful and sharp like edges. She had found a file, a name, a signature that did not belong. She had found a nurse who remembered a small boy and a woman who had cried and left. She could not promise more than that, but she could promise movement. I felt something tighten in my stomach, then break. The feeling was like the first breath after being underwater too long. I was both terrified and relieved. Ruth said she had to leave tonight. She said she had to go to a place where there were people who still kept paper and memory like treasure. She said she would call me tomorrow with more. I waited for her call. The night was thick and still. I could hear a dog barking 2 houses away. I thought about how one word, said loudly at a table, had bent my life toward a different road. I thought about how my son had left and then sided with someone else. I thought about how small kindnesses matter. At 11, the doorbell rang. It was late. Nobody was supposed to be here. The roses outside quivered in the cool air. I put down my cup and walked to the door. When I opened it, I saw a man with a tired face I had never seen before standing on my porch. He wore a jacket that had seen many winters. He held something in his hands that looked like a folded paper. "Margaret Hayes?" he asked. My heart hammered. I had not expected anyone to come. This was not the quiet change I had imagined. This was loud and sudden and uninvited. "Yes," I answered. He looked past me for a moment, like searching for a light. Then he took a breath and said, "I think someone wants to tell you something. I have a record." But his eyes flicked to the street where a figure moved in the shadow. "You shouldn't open this alone." At that moment, a car slowed up at the end of the road. Headlights cut through the dark and a figure in a dark coat stepped out and moved toward the house. My hand found the doorframe. My breath came fast. My heart felt like a bird trapped in a small box, beating the walls. Inside the house, in the quiet kitchen, where the roses smelled faintly of tea, the man handed me the folded paper. His fingers brushed mine. There was a name on the paper that matched the photograph Ruth had shown me. There was a signature that had the slope of someone else's hand. Then, from outside, a voice called Daniel's name. It was not his voice. It was a voice thin with panic. I did not know what was coming next. I only knew the sound of a life about to change. And my story had only just begun. The man on my porch held the paper like it could break if he squeezed too hard. He introduced himself in a soft voice. "Mr. Collins," he said. "I work at the county records office. I asked around because Ruth called and said you might want to see something." He looked at me with kind eyes. "I'm sorry to come at this hour, Miss Hayes." His hands shook a little as he handed the folded paper to me. I felt the paper as if it were warm. The name on the top made my stomach drop. It was Daniel's old name from the baby picture, the name I had almost forgotten because time had smoothed it down like a river stone. "You shouldn't open this alone," he said. "But if you do, I'll wait with you." That was when the figure in the dark coat reached the path and stepped into my porch light. It was Daniel. He looked wrong in the pale light. His jacket was buttoned only halfway, and his hair stuck up like he had run his hands through it many times. His face was ashen, and his breath came fast. For a second, I thought he might be sick. For a longer second, I knew he was terrified. "Mom," he said, his voice thin. "What is that?" I stood and walked slowly to him. The paper had heard my name before I did. My hand trembled. I pulled my fingers away from the fold before I opened it because I wanted to be careful with what came next. Daniel took a step toward the door as if to come inside, then stopped. He looked at Mr. Collins. He looked at me. His hands were curled like someone trying to hold on to himself. "Is that about me?" he asked. There was no anger in his voice, only raw hurt and a kind of wild confusion I recognized from his childhood when a bully had stolen his lunch. He sounded like a child asking for a toy back. "Yes," Mr. Collins said. "This is a record from the hospital and some notes from the adoption agency. Some things don't add up. Ruth asked me to make copies because she thought you should see them." Daniel's jaw tightened. He lifted his hand and brushed his hair from his forehead. For a moment, he seemed to shrink in the doorway. He had always been tall and strong in ways that made people respect him, but here, in the porch light, he looked smaller than his age. "Mom," he said again. His voice broke slightly. "Tell me you know something. Tell me you were joking." I had not been joking. My mouth felt dry. I wanted to tell him nothing at all because nothing at all was safe. I wanted to open the paper and read it for him and for myself and then close it and pretend we had never looked. But the truth had the shape of a beast and it would not be quiet. I sat down at the kitchen table with the paper between my hands. Daniel moved to stand in front of me, like he was trying to be my shield and I was trying to be his. He reached for the paper, his fingers hovering over mine, but he did not touch it. I unfolded the first sheet. The letters and numbers looked the same as any other record, but the names made a cold path through me. There were 2 birth certificates. One was stamped and faded, the other had a different mother's name. There was a note in a small handwriting that said, "File misplacement. Possible swap at intake." Then there was a stamp, reviewed 1999. My hands felt heavy, like someone had replaced my limbs with wet wood. Daniel's face changed as if someone had pressed a button. The worry left like fog. His eyes went hard. He stepped back and laughed once, a short, sharp sound that did not sound like him. "What is this?" he asked. "This is what Ruth found," I said. My voice was small. "Mr. Collins found records that suggest there may have been a mistake or worse. Someone may have switched papers." Daniel's laugh died. He looked at the paper like it was a stranger. He rubbed his temple as if he had a headache. "Switched papers," he said slowly. "Why would anyone?" "Mom, that's impossible." His voice rose. "You told me stories. You told me everything about the day I was born. You told me you left because you thought it was best. You told me it was the law." "I told you what I was told," I answered. I wished my mouth would stop shaking. I was told I had no choice. I believed it. I thought the papers were right. I thought that was the end. Daniel's hand tightened into a fist. He looked at me like someone who had found a secret in the back of a drawer and realized it belonged to someone else. "So you left?" His face was a mask. "You left and never asked why? You never tried to fight?" "I fought the way I could," I said. "I tried. I wrote letters, but they said the case was closed. I was young and scared and I didn't know what to do. I thought it was the only path to keep you safe. I stopped because the rest felt like bait." He took a step back. Tears came to his eyes, quick and hot. "You lied to me," he said. The words were small, but the house felt like it could not hold them. "You let me grow up with someone else's name." My chest burned. I had not lied to him. I had protected him the only way I knew how. I wanted to tell him this, to show him the nights I had cried into a pillow, the money I had saved, the hospital visits I had made, the calls I had not kept up because I was afraid of the answers. But the words would not help him now. They would only pile on, a slow avalanche of reasons and excuses. Sophie's car pulled up at that moment, the gravel crunching loud on the quiet street. She ran up to the porch with one of her heels in her hand. Behind her, the headlights cut the dark, and 2 other cars slowed as people watched from inside. "What is happening?" Sophie demanded. Her voice was sharp. She looked at the paper and then at me with an expression I had seen before, the look of someone who was certain she already knew the whole story. "Margaret, are you trying to make drama?" She stepped forward as if to take the paper. Daniel moved to block her. "Back up," he said. He put his hand above hers. "This is between Mom and me." Sophie's lips thinned. She looked at me with a face that said she had been robbed of her fun. "This is ridiculous. You always make things up, Mom. You always create stories." She spoke loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. "We came here for dinner, not a show." Someone from the street had dialed a number. It felt like everyone had a front row seat now. Heads popped out of windows. A neighbor lingered near their hedge, looking like they had come out to see a play. Daniel's face turned from angry to wounded. He held the paper as if it might burn him. "Dad," someone asked from the car. It was Rebecca, one of Daniel's older friends who had been at the dinner. She had a phone in her hand, and she looked at Daniel like she needed to know who he was. Daniel's voice cracked. "No. He's at work." Sophie's eyes softened for a second in a mask that I could not read. Then she straightened. Her mouth was small. "You always had a soft spot for old stories, Margaret." There was a cruel edge to her smile. "Maybe you missed the chance to be a real mother." The words landed like a slap. Daniel's shoulders shook. He looked like someone being pulled by 2 ropes at once, one tugging him toward anger, the other toward a memory of how small he had felt as a child. I stood and moved to him. I put my hands on his arms. He did not pull away. He looked at me, and the urgency in his eyes was plain. "Tell me everything," he said. "Now." So I told him. I told him about the day they took him away, the woman with the blue coat, the papers signed in a room that smelled of bleach. I told him about the nights I sat in the dark and wondered. I told him about the letters I sent that came back as if no one had read them. I told him about the fear that had kept me small and polite and quiet for 20 years. Each word was a small stone I dropped into a deep well. When I finished, Daniel closed his eyes. He breathed out loud and long, like someone who had been underwater too long and had just surfaced. For a long moment, no one spoke. The porch light hummed. A dog barked somewhere far away. Then a new sound broke the quiet, a car door. It slammed with a loud crack that made me jump. Headlights flooded the yard and a figure appeared in the glare, wearing a dark suit and holding a briefcase. He walked with a careful, deliberate step. People often wear suits when they want to make sure everyone pays attention. He introduced himself as Mr. Lang, a local attorney. He said he had been sent by a firm that handled lost records. He held up a folded paper with an official seal. "We need to talk," he said to Daniel, in a voice that had the weight of many small rules behind it. "There has been a complaint filed. There are questions about a case from 1999. We may need to petition the court to open the records. But you should know, if this goes forward, it will be public. Your name could be in papers. People may find out." Daniel looked like he might fall. His face went pale, and his hands were empty now, the paper slipping from between his fingers and landing on the porch with a small, soft sound. "Public," he whispered. The word seemed to hurt. "You can't." He stopped and leaned on the railing as if the world had become a heavy thing. "This isn't something I can decide tonight," Mr. Lang said. "It is a legal process. But someone has already filed an inquiry. If you want to stop it, you can file to seal records, but you will have to act fast." Daniel's head snapped up. He met my eyes. His mouth moved like someone searching for a word. "Mom," he said. It was not a question. It was a plea. I had opened a door. I had called Ruth. I had asked for help. I had wanted to know the truth. But now the truth stood in the porch light and asked for a choice I had not expected to make: protect privacy or uncover what had been hidden. Daniel looked at the lawyer, at Sophie, at the neighbors who had come to the fence with their phones out. He looked at me like I had given him both a gift and a wound. "Please," he said to me very low. "Undo this. Stop it. I don't want my life to be." He could not finish. My hands trembled. I wanted to reach out and take the whole world off his shoulders. I wanted to fold time back into something safe and small. But the paper on the table had already been read. The hour had a voice now, and it was not going to be quiet. Ruth's voice came soft on my phone. She had arrived and was standing in my kitchen doorway. "Margaret," she said. "I'm here. There's more, but there are other people who know. Be ready. Be ready." The words echoed like a bell. I looked at Daniel. He looked at me like a man who had lost the map to his life. Then, before I could speak, there was a loud knock on the door. It was not the polite rapping of someone who wanted to be let in. It was 3 heavy knocks, each one like a drumbeat. Someone on the other side of that door was not waiting to be friendly. The sound made the porch feel smaller and the night colder. My heart pounded in my throat. Outside, under the streetlight, a figure moved quickly away from the curb and into a car that sped off, leaving a smear of taillight behind it. The knock came again, loud and sharp. I did not know who would stand on the other side: an officer, a reporter, a stranger with more papers. I only knew that the next moment would change everything we had gathered so carefully in the light. I rose from my chair. Daniel's hand found mine, trembling. Sophie stepped back, her shoes clicking on the porch. Mr. Collins straightened like a man who had been pushed into water and now had to decide whether to swim. I opened the door. A police officer stood there, his uniform neat, his face serious. He held a clipboard and a radio. Behind him, 2 other officers stood in the yard, looking like shadows. The officer's voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Hayes," he asked. "We received a complaint. There's an active inquiry regarding a missing person file from 1999. We need to ask you a few questions." Daniel's knees buckled. His face crumpled like paper. He looked at me with a look that said he had been pulled into a storm with no umbrella. "Please," he said, turning to me, his voice breaking. "Mom, please make them go. Please tell them it's a mistake." My throat closed. I had wanted truth. The truth had arrived with a uniform and a clipboard. The night outside felt full of eyes. I thought of everything I had been too afraid to change, and now everything wanted to change at once. I could not undo the call I had made. I could not unring the bell of curiosity. I had asked for help to learn the truth 20 years ago, but tonight that truth had friends who wore suits and uniforms. I had to decide what to do for my son, for myself, for the life that had been quiet and safe for so long. As the officer stepped forward to ask his first question, Daniel begged once more, his voice thin and raw. "Please, Mom. Undo what you started." Outside, the night waited like a breath held too long. I did not know what to answer. The door clicked closed behind the officer, and my hands were cold on the table. And then, very near, a car horn blared urgent, angry, and close. The sound snapped the quiet like a twig. From the road, another set of headlights rushed toward the house, and a face I did not expect stared in the glass, like someone carrying a verdict. The next moment would not be small. It would be loud. The horn outside blared again, long, sharp, and angry. It cut through the house like a blade. Everyone froze. Even the police officer, who had just opened his clipboard, turned his head toward the window. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened until his knuckles turned white. The headlights outside swept across my living room walls like searchlights. And then the car door slammed. Hard. Footsteps, quick, uneven, purposeful, marched toward my front porch. For a moment, I thought it might be Ruth, or maybe another officer, or someone from the records office coming with more papers. But when the figures stepped into the porch light, it was my ex-husband, Richard. A man I had not seen in more than 20 years. A man Daniel barely remembered. A man who, if I'm being honest, I had prayed I would never have to see again. He looked older, thinner, and angrier than I remembered. His hair was gray around the edges, and his shoulders sagged like someone carrying decades of secrets. He pointed at me before even stepping through the door. "Margaret," he said, breathless. "What did you do?" My heart nearly stopped. Daniel staggered backward like he'd been punched. "Dad," he whispered. What are you doing here?" Richard didn't look at him, not even for a second. His eyes were pinned to me like I held something he needed, or something he feared. The police officer stepped between us calmly. "Sir, you can't barge in like that. There's an active inquiry here." Richard ignored him completely. He jabbed a finger toward the folded documents on the table. "I heard," he said. "I heard from her. I warned you not to involve her again, Margaret. I warned you 20 years ago. And now you started something you will regret." His voice broke on the last word. I felt the room tilt. Sophie, looking both scared and nosy at the same time, whispered, "What is going on?" The police officer cleared his throat. "Sir, do you have relevance to the 1999 missing person case?" Richard's jaw locked. Then he looked straight at Daniel. "I should have told you the truth myself," he said quietly. "But your mother swore she'd leave the past alone." Daniel spun toward me. "What truth? Mom, what truth? What is happening?" My throat closed. My hands felt cold. I didn't answer because I didn't know where to begin. Instead, Richard stepped farther inside, brushing past the officer. He reached into his jacket with trembling fingers and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed, soft around the edges, as if it had been opened and closed too many times. He dropped it on the table. Daniel stared at it. No one moved. The house had gone completely silent, like it was waiting to hear the next breath. Finally, Richard spoke. "You were never supposed to see that file," he said low. "That paper wasn't meant for you, Danny." Daniel blinked. "Why not?" Richard's eyes darkened. "Because you weren't supposed to know you were misidentified." The words hit like a lightning bolt. Daniel's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair. Sophie gasped dramatically, the way she did when she wanted attention. I barely heard her. The police took a small step forward, alert. "Sir," one of them said, "you need to explain that." Clearly. Richard swallowed hard. His voice cracked open. "We didn't lose a child in 1999, not the way the records say," he whispered. "It was more complicated than that." Daniel's chest rose and fell rapidly. He looked sick. "What do you mean, misidentified?" he asked, his voice breaking. Dad, what are you saying? Misidentified as what? Richard rubbed his forehead, shaking his head. It wasn't supposed to become public, he said. It was supposed to stay buried. He wasn't making sense. He wasn't giving answers. Only riddles. Confusing ones. I stepped forward. Richard, I said softly. If you know something, say it. Please. For Daniel. He looked at me for the first time with something that was not anger. It was fear. And something close to regret. I tried to warn you, Margaret, he said quietly. I tried to stop this. I told you if you open this chapter again, everything would fall apart. Daniel yelled. Stop talking around it. His voice cracked in the middle. Just tell me what you mean. Misidentified as what? As who? Richard opened his mouth to answer. But before he could, another knock, sharp and urgent, hit the door. Everyone jumped. The police officer stepped forward quickly. Stay back, he said, hand near his radio. No one else should be arriving at this time. But someone had. The door swung open slowly. This time, it wasn't a stranger. This time, it was a woman. A woman I had not seen in 20 years. A woman whose face I recognized instantly. Ruth. Except she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a younger man, maybe in his 20s. Tall. Slender. Curly dark hair. Eyes the exact shape Daniel had as a child. My breath caught. Daniel turned slowly and froze when he saw the young man. Everything in the room went silent. Even the police. Ruth stepped forward with her hands raised as if she didn't want anyone to panic. Margaret, she said gently. I told you there was more. Daniel stared at the young man. His lips parted but no words came out. Mom, he whispered, voice trembling. Who is that? I felt my entire body begin to shake. I didn't know what the answer was. Not yet. But the young man stepped inside, eyes locked on Daniel. He looked nervous. Scared. But determined. I didn't want to come tonight, he said quietly. But after the call, after the records were pulled, I had to. Daniel stepped backward like he'd been hit. Who are you? He whispered. The young man swallowed. My name is Michael. And then, very softly, with a trembling voice. I think I'm the person they were looking for in the 1999 case. Everyone sucked in a breath. Daniel's face drained of color. He looked at me, then at Richard, then back at the young man. What? Daniel said weakly. What do you mean? Why are you here? Why would you be connected to my name? Michael looked at his shoes, then at me, then at the police. I've been searching for answers my whole life, he said. And when your friend contacted me, I realized my story might be tied to yours. Daniel shook his head violently. No, this is crazy. He turned toward me, tears spilling from his eyes. Mom, tell me this isn't what it looks like. Before I could speak, the police officer stepped forward. Let's slow down, he said firmly. Michael, do you have identification? Michael nodded and pulled out a worn ID card. The officer checked it. Then checked the papers on the table. Then checked the ID again. His eyebrows slowly rose. Ma'am, he said, turning toward me, this might be more serious than a simple file mistake. I felt faint. Richard grabbed the back of a chair, breathing hard. Daniel stood frozen, staring at Michael like his world was splitting apart. Then Michael spoke again, voice soft, voice shaking. My adoptive mother died last year, he said. She left me a letter, saying I wasn't supposed to know the truth. Daniel stared. Michael swallowed. She said I wasn't the baby she was meant to get, he whispered. She said something went wrong at the hospital in 1999. A sound escaped Daniel's throat, a broken sound I had never heard from him before. Michael continued, voice trembling. She said, the baby she was meant to adopt was taken by someone else. Switched. Misfiled. Daniel covered his mouth with both hands. Sophie backed away from him like she didn't want to be part of the storm. The police officer stepped closer, his voice steady but urgent. Son, he said to Michael, are you saying there is a possibility you and Mr. Hayes? Yes, Michael said quietly. There is a possibility we were switched. The entire room went still. Daniel's face turned gray. He looked at me helplessly. And Mom, he whispered, voice cracking. I don't understand. What is happening? I stepped toward him, but before I could speak, the police radio crackled. One officer lifted it to his ear. His eyes widened. He whispered something to the others. Then he turned toward me with a shocked expression. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "we just received confirmation from the county office." Everyone stared. He cleared his throat. "There were discrepancies. Major ones. The case has been escalated." Daniel leaned forward, gripping the table to keep from falling. The officer continued. "Two individuals from your address are listed as possible subjects in a 1999 hospital mix-up investigation." The air left my lungs. Two individuals? I turned to look at Daniel. He stared back at me, terrified. The officer took a step closer. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the two individuals in question are—" But before he could finish, a loud crash shattered the tension. The window beside the kitchen exploded, glass spraying across the counter. Everyone screamed. Someone outside had thrown something through it. A brick, wrapped in a note. The brick rolled across the floor and stopped at Daniel's feet. He slowly bent down, picked up the note with shaking hands, and opened it. His face turned white. His hands shook violently. He whispered one single sentence. "Mom, they know." And that is where the moment snapped open. Loud, violent, terrifying. And the truth was no longer just knocking at our door. It had already broken the window. Glass glittered across my kitchen floor like tiny, dangerous stars. The wind pushed through the broken window, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of the night inside. Daniel stood frozen, the note trembling in his hand. Sophie covered her mouth and backed into the wall. Ruth jumped forward, pulling Michael behind her. The police officers drew closer, one stepping toward the window, the other toward Daniel. "Sir," the officer said urgently, "drop the note. Step back." But Daniel couldn't move. He just stared at the paper like it was a ghost. "Mom," he whispered. "Mom, they know." My heart squeezed tight. I stepped forward slowly, like approaching a frightened animal. "Daniel," I said softly. "What does the note say?" He looked up at me, and for a moment he looked exactly like he did when he was little, confused, hurt, and trying not to cry. Then he held out the note with shaking fingers. I took it gently, careful not to cut myself on the glass. The handwriting was messy, rushed, almost angry. 3 short lines. "Stop digging. You don't want to know the truth. Some people were better off lost." My knees weakened. The room spun slightly. Someone out there knew. Someone out there was watching. And someone out there didn't want the truth to surface. The officer stepped beside me and read it over my shoulder. His jaw tensed. "We need to secure this house," he said. But Daniel suddenly snapped out of his daze. He grabbed the officer's arm. "I want answers," he shouted, voice shaking. "I want the truth. Tell me what the record said. Tell me why my life is being ripped apart in one night." "Daniel," I began. But he shook his head violently. "No. Mom, you knew something. You made a call. You contacted people. You brought all this here." His voice cracked. "You started something you shouldn't have." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "Because I had to," I whispered. He stared at me, eyes full of pain. "Why? Why now? Why not tell me before my whole life explodes?" Before I could answer, another voice cut through the tension. "Ruth." "Because someone lied to her," Ruth said firmly. "Someone lied to both of you." Everyone turned. Ruth stepped closer, her voice calm but heavy. "I told you I found more," she said quietly. "And I didn't want to say anything until I confirmed it, but after seeing this?" She gestured to the brick on the floor. "You all need to hear this now." Even the officers paused. Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper, old, yellowed, slightly ripped on the corner. She placed it on the table. It was a hospital log. One line had been circled in red ink. A line with 3 words. "Infant transferred, Hayes." Daniel stared at it, confused. "That's me," he whispered. "Isn't it?" Ruth shook her head slowly. "No, it might not be." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Daniel blinked hard. What do you mean?" he whispered. Michael shifted uncomfortably behind Ruth. His eyes lowered to the floor. Ruth took a deep breath. That log shows there were 2 baby boys processed under the name Hayes on the same night in 1999, she said. 2 newborns. 2 emergency transfers. One mother listed as unidentified. One listed as Margaret Hayes. My breath stilled. Daniel's voice came out in a whisper. So, one of us belonged to Mom? Ruth nodded. And one of you didn't. Daniel stumbled back like he had been shoved. He pressed a hand to his chest. No, this is insane. Michael's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. I think, he said shakily. I think I'm the one who was supposed to stay with her. Daniel whipped toward him, eyes blazing. Don't. His voice was sharp and shaking. Don't say that. You don't know that. Michael swallowed. I have the same birthmark, he whispered. The one she described on the phone. I felt my heart fall somewhere deep inside me. A birthmark. My son had been born with a unique birthmark on his shoulder. A tiny shape, almost like a small cloud. The one they told me didn't matter. The one they said wasn't identifying. I looked at Daniel. I looked at Michael. And for the very first time in 20 years, fear crawled up my spine. The police officer cleared his throat. We need to separate everyone, he said. We need to verify these claims. We need. Before he could finish, Richard stepped forward, trembling. Enough, he whispered. Everyone turned. His hands were shaking as he reached for the hospital log. Richard, I said quietly. What do you know? His face twisted with grief. I should have told you before, he said. But I was young. Scared. I thought I was protecting us. Protecting us from what? I demanded. He swallowed hard, then looked right at Daniel. Son. His voice broke. I don't know which one of you is ours. A gasp burst from someone, maybe Sophie, maybe Ruth, maybe even me. Daniel staggered backward, hitting the wall. He looked like his entire world had collapsed into dust. You don't know? He whispered, horrified. Richard's eyes filled with tears. No. His voice cracked. I never knew. I never told your mother. I tried to keep it buried. But now, he gestured toward the brick on the floor. Now someone else knows too. Daniel shook his head violently. No, you're lying. You're lying. I'm your son. Michael's face twisted with pain. I don't want to take anything from you, he whispered. I just want to know the truth. Daniel turned on him. Don't pretend you're innocent. You showed up here with my face and my name and you think you belong in this family? You don't know us. Michael flinched. Ruth stepped forward protectively. Enough, Daniel, she said softly. No, Daniel shouted. No, it's not enough. My whole life is being ripped away. You expect me to just breathe through it. His voice shattered. He pressed both hands to his forehead. I don't know who I am, he whispered. I don't know who she is. He looked at me, tears blurred in his eyes. And I don't know if you're even my mother. The words sliced me open. I reached for him instinctively, but he stepped away like my touch would burn him. Daniel, I whispered, don't say that. He looked at me with a face that broke my heart wide open. If I'm not your son, his voice trembled. Then who am I? My legs gave out, and I grabbed the chair to steady myself. The police officer stepped forward. We need to relocate everyone to the station for questioning, he said firmly. This house is no longer safe, and this situation is beyond home resolution. Sophie gasped. What? The station? No, this is humiliating. Daniel, tell them no. But Daniel wasn't listening. He was staring at nothing, breathing fast. Richard rubbed a hand over his face. This is exactly what I tried to stop, he whispered. I didn't want the past to rise up again. The officer repeated firmer. Everyone needs to come with us. I opened my mouth to agree, anything to get Daniel somewhere safe. But then, suddenly, boom. A loud, violent crash erupted from the back of the house. Like someone had kicked in a door. The officers instantly reached for their radios. Unit 7, possible forced entry, backup needed. Everyone froze. Even the wind outside seemed to stop moving. Daniel stared toward the hallway, eyes wide with fear. Mom, he whispered. Someone's inside. The sound echoed through the house. A deep, violent crash that shook the walls. Everyone froze. Even the police officers stiffened, hands hovering near their holsters. Daniel's voice came out in a trembling whisper. "Mom, someone's in the house." The officer nearest to the hall lifted his hand slowly, signaling for silence. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Do not move." But the house was old. Every shift of air made the wooden floors creak. And now, from the back hallway, a hallway that led to the bedrooms, there were footsteps. Slow, soft, measured, not rushed, not afraid. Like whoever was back there wasn't hiding at all, but approaching. Ruth pulled Michael behind her. Sophie grabbed Daniel's arm, wide-eyed. Richard stepped closer to me, something like guilt and fear mixing on his face. The police officer took one step toward the hallway. "Identify yourself," he called out firmly. No answer. Only footsteps, getting closer. The second officer murmured into his radio, requesting backup. The first officer lifted his flashlight, beam aimed toward the dark corridor. "Is anyone back there?" he demanded. Still nothing. Then, a shadow moved. Just at the edge of the hallway. A tall figure. Standing still. Watching. The officer's flashlight caught the outline of a shoulder. Nothing more. "Step into the light," the officer ordered. The figure didn't move. Instead, it spoke. A calm, low voice. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." I felt the breath catch in my throat. I knew that voice. It was older now. Softer. But I knew it. The figure stepped forward slowly, hands raised. His face entered the beam of the flashlight, and my heart stopped. It was Dr. Everett. The hospital doctor from 1999. The man who had handled the emergency transfers. The man who told me the case was closed. The man I had not seen since the night they took my baby away. He looked older, gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, tired shoulders, but it was him. He looked at me with something like sorrow. "Hello, Margaret," he said quietly. The room erupted in confused whispers. The police stiffened. Daniel stared at him like he was seeing a ghost. Michael looked pale. Richard let out a soft curse under his breath. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt heavy, my heart beat loud in my ears. The officer stepped forward. "Sir, you need to explain why you entered this home." Dr. Everett nodded calmly. "I will," he said. "I came through the back door. It was unlocked." Daniel turned toward me sharply. Why was the door unlocked? Before I could answer, Dr. Everett lifted a hand. "Please," he said softly. "I'm not your enemy." The officer gestured for him to move forward slowly with his hands visible. Dr. Everett obeyed. He walked into the dining room with quiet, deliberate steps. Steps that carried 20 years of secrets with them. When he stopped a few feet away, he let out a long breath. "I came because I heard the inquiry had been reopened," he said. "And because I knew that once you found the paperwork, it wouldn't take long." Daniel stepped forward. "Take long for what?" he demanded. "To ruin our lives?" Dr. Everett looked at him with a sad, understanding expression. "No," he said softly. "To finally tell the truth." Richard's jaw clenched. "You had the chance to tell the truth 20 years ago." Dr. Everett turned toward him slowly. "And I'm here now to fix what I broke." The officer interjected. "Doctor, we need you to clarify exactly why you're here. And what you know about the 1999 case." Dr. Everett closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were full of guilt. "The mix-up wasn't an accident," he said quietly. The room went completely silent. Michael's breath hitched. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. I felt the floor tilt under me. Dr. Everett continued. "It was supposed to be temporary," he said. "A temporary relocation, to protect one of the babies." The officer frowned. "Protect? From what?" Dr. Everett didn't answer immediately. His voice dropped. "There were threats. That year, there were people looking for a child. A specific child. A child born under a certain name." My stomach turned cold. "Which child?" I whispered. He looked at me. Then at Daniel. Then at Michael. "Both of them," he said. A gasp rippled through the room. "Someone wanted to take them," he continued. "Someone who shouldn't have had access to any adoption records. Someone dangerous." "Who?" the officer pressed. Dr. Everett shook his head slowly. "I can't say the name. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because." He swallowed hard. They're still alive. Daniel stepped forward, voice breaking. So you switched us? You swapped babies to save us. Dr. Everett flinched. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. But then a file went missing. A signature was forged. The wrong family was contacted. His shoulders sagged. And by the time I tried to correct it, everything was sealed. My heartbeat thudded painfully. I remembered that night. The nurse telling me he had to be transferred. The officer escorting me out of the hallway. The empty crib. Back then, I didn't know what danger meant. I only knew loss. Now, the truth sat in front of me like a storm waiting to break. Daniel's voice shook as he spoke. Which one of us was supposed to go with which family? Dr. Everett closed his eyes. Doctor, the officer pressed firmly, you need to answer that. He opened his eyes again, and they were wet. Daniel, he said softly. You were not supposed to leave her. Sophie gasped so loudly it echoed. Daniel's knees buckled. He gripped the table. That means... His voice trembled. That means she's my mother. I felt warmth flood my chest. Relief, grief, love, heartbreak, all at once. But before I could take a step toward him, Dr. Everett's voice rose slightly. But that also means... He looked at Michael. You were the one in danger. Michael's eyes widened. Me? Dr. Everett nodded solemnly. You were the child they were looking for. You were the one who needed to disappear. That's why things were switched. The room began spinning. Daniel looked between me and Michael, helpless. So you protected him, Daniel whispered. And in doing so, you took me away from her? Dr. Everett bowed his head. Yes. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You should have told us. Dr. Everett's voice cracked. I couldn't. The threats didn't stop. They still haven't. That's why someone threw that brick tonight. They know the truth is coming out. The police officer stiffened. Doctor, are you telling us there is an active threat toward these two men? Yes, Dr. Everett said. And toward Margaret too. She was never supposed to make that call. My breath caught. Daniel stepped closer to me, panic filling his eyes again. Mom, are we in danger? I reached for his hand. But right before our fingers touched, the officer's radio crackled loudly. A frantic voice came through. Unit 7, urgent. A vehicle matching the suspect's profile has been spotted circling the block. Repeat, circling the block. Proceed with caution. Everyone's faces drained of color. Dr. Everett whispered. They found you. The officer's radio crackled again, this time louder, sharper. Unit 7, suspect vehicle confirmed. Approaching the residence. Repeat, approaching the residence. My heart jumped to my throat. Daniel stepped in front of me instinctively, hands shaking but body firm. Michael grabbed Ruth's sleeve, eyes wide with fear. Sophie ducked behind Richard, whispering, "Oh my God, oh my God." Even Richard, always so stubborn, looked shaken to his core. Dr. Everett's face went pale. They're not going to leave, he murmured. They want to scare you into dropping the inquiry. The police officer took charge immediately. Everyone stay inside. Move into the living room, away from the windows. We have backup en route. Do not open the door for anyone except law enforcement. But before he could guide us away, headlights blazed through my living room curtains. Bright, white, uncomfortably close. A car had parked directly in front of my house. The engine was still running. Its lights didn't turn off. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, stay behind me. His voice shook, but the protective instinct in him was unmistakable. A small piece of the little boy who used to shield me from barking dogs. The second police officer stepped to the window, staying low. Car's occupied, he whispered. Driver is not exiting. Plate number, the first officer asked. Already sent it in. The officer turned to the rest of us. Everyone needs to stay calm. The moment backup arrives. But he didn't get to finish. Because at that moment, the car door opened. A collective gasp filled the room. A figure stepped out slowly. Dark coat. Tall. Face hidden by the angle of the headlights. They didn't rush. They didn't sneak. They didn't run. They walked. Straight toward my front door. The officer moved fast. Margaret, everyone back. He positioned himself between us and the entrance. The figure reached the porch. The boards creaked under their steps. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Daniel whispered, "Don't answer it. Please don't answer it." I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were carved from ice. The officer shouted through the door. "Identify yourself. This is law enforcement." Silence. Then a voice replied. Low, steady, mature. "I'm not here to harm anyone." Dr. Everett inhaled sharply. "I know that voice." The officer frowned. "Sir, step back from the door." "Back up is." But the figure interrupted quietly. "Open the door, Margaret. We need to talk. Now." My entire body froze. I knew that voice too. Not because it was comforting, but because it belonged to someone I had spent 2 decades trying to forget. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel looked at me. "Mom, who is it?" Before I could answer, the police officer unlocked the door just enough to crack it open, staying behind it, ready. The porch light spilled onto the visitor's face. And there he stood. Sheriff Whitaker. The sheriff who handled the hospital case in 1999. The sheriff who told me there was nothing to investigate. The sheriff who shut every door in my face. He looked older, worn, but his eyes were the same, sharp, unreadable. The officer stepped forward. "Sheriff Whitaker? This is an active investigation. You cannot interfere." But Sheriff Whitaker raised both hands calmly. "I'm not here to interfere. I'm here because the truth has been twisted long enough." Daniel stepped to my side. "What truth?" he demanded. "What do you know?" Sheriff Whitaker looked at him, then at Michael, then at me. Finally, he stepped inside and closed the door. "The person you're all afraid of," he said quietly, "is not here tonight." Relief washed through the room. But only for a moment. Because then he added, "And the real threat hasn't been the person outside this house." He turned toward Dr. Everett. "It's been standing in front of you the whole time." Gasps erupted. Michael moved behind Ruth. Richard stepped protectively closer to me. Dr. Everett blinked. "Sheriff, what are you talking about?" I tried to help both boys. "No," Sheriff Whitaker cut in sharply. "You tried to help yourself." The room went silent. Completely silent. Sheriff Whitaker pulled a small folder from his coat. "I kept these files for 20 years, he said. "Because someone at that hospital tampered with the adoption records. Someone forged signatures. Someone swapped 2 newborn boys." Daniel swallowed hard. "You're saying he did it?" He pointed at Dr. Everett. Dr. Everett shook his head, panicked. No, I didn't swap anyone. I was trying to protect Michael." Sheriff Whitaker opened the folder. "This is the paperwork you submitted in 1999. He laid down a form with Dr. Everett's signature. And this." He pulled out another form with the same signature. But this one was proven forged. The room reeled. Dr. Everett whispered, "That wasn't me. I never signed that second form." Sheriff Whitaker nodded slowly. "I know." He turned the page. "And this proves who did." He placed one last sheet on the table. Everyone leaned in. Everyone froze. Because the signature wasn't Dr. Everett's. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Richard's. It wasn't any of the nurses. It belonged to someone none of us had suspected. Someone who stood in my kitchen, with fear already rising in his eyes. Sheriff Whitaker said the name out loud. "Your father swapped the babies, Daniel." It was Richard. The entire room exploded. "No," Daniel shouted, voice cracking. "You're lying." Richard stumbled backward, hands shaking. I didn't mean, Margaret, I wasn't, listen." But Sheriff Whitaker didn't stop. "You signed the transfer form. You bribed the night nurse. You told the staff one baby had to disappear for safety. But you chose the wrong child." Michael's breath hitched. Dr. Everett looked stunned. Ruth covered her mouth. Daniel stared at his father with a face full of betrayal so deep it made my heart ache. "Dad," he whispered. "Tell me he's lying." Richard's hands trembled violently. "I did it to protect you," he said weakly. "Protect me?" Daniel screamed. "You didn't even know which baby was yours." Richard's eyes filled with tears. I thought they would take the wrong one." I panicked. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Daniel's expression shattered completely. You ruined our lives, he whispered. You ruined my life. Richard fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I was young. Stupid. I was trying to protect our family. Sheriff Whitaker closed the folder. Richard Hayes, he said firmly. You're under arrest for falsifying hospital records and interfering with a custody case. The officers moved in instantly. Sophie screamed. Michael stepped back. Daniel covered his face with both hands. I stepped forward as the officers lifted Richard. But before they led him toward the door, he looked at me. A broken man. I only ever loved him, he said. I just didn't know how to protect him. Then he was taken outside. Silence fell heavy in the house. Daniel sank onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably. I sat beside him slowly, gently. He didn't pull away this time. He leaned toward me without words. A wounded child seeking comfort. I wrapped my arms around him. His voice cracked as he whispered, Mom, who am I? I brushed his hair gently, the way I used to when he had nightmares. You're my son, I whispered. No matter what the papers say. No matter what happened 20 years ago. You're mine. He cried into my shoulder, quiet, broken sobs that tore at my heart. Across the room, Michael watched, eyes soft, understanding, unsure. Ruth touched his arm gently. And in that quiet moment, with the police outside, the truth finally unraveling, and two young men standing at the edge of a shared past, I realized something. The truth didn't destroy families. Secrets did. And tonight, finally, the secrets were gone. The house felt impossibly quiet after they took Richard away. Quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful, but hollow, as if every wall had heard the truth and was trying to understand it. Daniel sat beside me, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His face was in his hands. His breaths were uneven. Every few seconds, his fingers curled tightly, like he was trying to hold himself together. I rubbed gentle circles on his back, the same way I used to when he was little and afraid of thunder. Daniel, I whispered. I'm here. He didn't answer. He just leaned against me, his head heavy on my shoulder. Across the room, Michael stood by the broken window with Ruth's hand resting on his arm. He looked lost, but patient. Like someone who had carried many unanswered questions and was finally seeing the door to them open. The police officers secured the front door, placing temporary panels over the shattered glass. Sheriff Whitaker remained inside with us, reviewing the files, papers that had taken 20 years to resurface. After several minutes, he looked up at me. Mrs. Hayes, he said gently, we're going to need statements from everyone here, but for tonight, you all are safe. Safe. A word that felt both meaningful and fragile. When the officers finally stepped outside, promising a patrol car would remain nearby, the house fell quiet again. Only the low hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen. Sophie, who had been clinging to Daniel like a lifeline earlier, stood near the dining table, arms crossed, face twisted with something between confusion and annoyance. So what happens now? She asked sharply. Daniel lifted his head slowly. Sophie, he whispered, not now. She scoffed. Not now? Daniel, your father just got arrested. A stranger shows up at our house saying he might be you. And you, she pointed at me. You brought all this chaos. And now you want to sit and hug. Daniel stiffened. You don't get to talk about her like that. The words were soft, but they carried a strength I hadn't heard from him in years. Sophie blinked, surprised. Daniel. No, he said, voice steadying. Not tonight. Not again. Not ever. It was the first time he had stood between us like that. Not as a barrier, but as a bridge. A quiet, powerful moment. Sophie stood frozen for a second, mouth open. Then she grabbed her purse sharply. I'm leaving, she snapped. Call me when you decide to come home. Daniel didn't even look at her. Good night, he said simply. She hesitated. She waited. She expected him to chase after her the way he always did. But he didn't. And that single moment, him choosing stillness instead of chasing, felt like the beginning of something new. She slammed the door behind her. The sound didn't sting the way it usually did. It simply disappeared into the night. Ruth broke the silence first. Daniel, she said gently, are you ready to talk? We can leave this for tomorrow if it's too heavy. Daniel wiped his face with shaking hands. No, he whispered. I need to know everything tonight. He really looked at me for the first time since the truth burst open. Mom, can you tell me what happened? From the beginning. I nodded slowly. Of course. We sat together in the living room, me, Daniel on one side, Michael on the other, Ruth beside him, and Sheriff Whitaker standing watch near the door. The lamp cast soft shadows across the room, the kind that made everything feel closer, gentler. I began quietly. When you were born, something wasn't right. Daniel's brows furrowed. Not with you, I added quickly. With everything happening around us. I took a deep breath. There were threats. Not against me, but against a child connected to the hospital staff. Someone had ties to a case no one would talk about. They were targeting a newborn Michael. Michael lowered his gaze. And the hospital didn't know who they were targeting, Sheriff Whitaker added. They had reason to believe the wrong child could be taken. Daniel swallowed. Me. Or Michael, I said softly. No one knew whose name was on the list. They only knew the danger was real. Dr. Everett had believed Michael was the target. Richard believed you were. Fearing the wrong baby would be taken. Your father panicked. And everything fell apart. As I told the story, Daniel's expression shifted from anger to confusion, to heartbreak, to something softer, understanding. When I reached the part where they took a baby from me, the baby I thought was him, my voice cracked. I begged them to let me see you. I begged them to let me hold you. But they said you had been transferred. They said it was for your safety. They said it was final. Tears filled Daniel's eyes again. And you didn't stop looking for me, he whispered. I cupped his face. I never stopped. Not for one day. A tear slid down his cheek. He leaned his forehead against mine. For a moment, everything felt whole again. Then Michael spoke quietly. Mrs. Hayes, I don't want to take anything from you. His voice trembled. I don't want Daniel to feel like he's losing you. Daniel looked at him, really looked. And something shifted. Not anger. Not suspicion. Just human understanding. You're not taking anything, Daniel said softly. You didn't ask for this. Neither of us did. Michael nodded, relief washing over his face. Sheriff Whitaker closed the folder gently. In the eyes of the law, he said carefully, the next steps are up to you. You can each request DNA tests. You can search for your original birth records. You can find closure, whatever that means for you. No rush, Ruth added softly. Everyone fell quiet. Daniel finally turned toward me, his eyes gentle. Mom, he said quietly. It doesn't matter what the test says. My breath caught. I'm your son, he whispered. Paper or no paper. I cupped his cheek again. And you always will be, I said, tears filling my eyes. No matter what we learn. He leaned into my hand. Michael spoke next, voice unsteady. And I would like to know where I came from. He looked at me, hopeful but fearful. I'd like to know you too. If that's okay. Emotion tightened my throat. That's more than okay, I whispered. You're welcome here. Always. Ruth squeezed his shoulder. Daniel nodded slowly. Sheriff Whitaker exhaled with relief. Dr. Everett, still pale and shaken, spoke quietly. The danger is gone now. The person looking for the child, he passed away last year. That's why I came tonight. To tell you it's finally safe to open the truth. Safe. A word I hadn't felt in 2 decades. The sheriff closed the folder. I'll file the statements tomorrow, he said softly. You're free to choose your own path now, without fear. He left quietly. Michael and Ruth remained a little longer. Long enough for Michael to exchange a small, uncertain smile with Daniel. Not brothers yet. Not strangers. Something in between. When they finally left, the house grew quiet again. Daniel stayed beside me on the couch. He leaned his head on my shoulder the way he used to when he was a boy. Mom, he whispered, thank you for fighting for me. A tear slipped down my cheek. Thank you, I whispered back, for coming back to me. We sat like that for a long time. In the quiet, in the healing. In the truth that hurt but also set us free. Eventually, Daniel stood. I'm staying here tonight, he said softly. I don't want you sleeping alone. My heart warmed. I'd like that, I said. He wiped his face, breathed deeply, and finally, for the first time that night, smiled. And that's how it ended. Not with fear. Not with broken pieces. Not with confusion. But with two young men who could finally seek their real beginnings. A mother who got her son back. A truth that was no longer buried. And a future that, for the first time in decades, felt peaceful.